I bought every red blush at my local Sephora, 12 to be exact. Today I'm going to be sharing with you everything that I learned. I'm giving you natural light demos, comparisons, swatches, and an in-depth look at all of these formulas so that ultimately you all can find the right red shade and formula that works for you. Viral pink is out. No more baby pink. I think red is here to stay. Can you tell that I like red? This is a new launch to 2023, which is the Basma cream blushes. They retail for $28 and you get 0.15 ounces of product. Now this is the shade Cherry, and Basma calls this a cherry red. And I would have to agree with them. This has a little bit of pink to it. It is a very flattering color, and I see this shade in particular from Basma being one that is going to flatter a lot of people. Red in general is a warm color, but when a red has a little bit of coral or pink to it, it ends up being, I think, more approachable for some people. So as I go through all these shades and all these formulas, I'll let you know through each one who I think they're best geared towards. You guys know I am a formula obsessed person. And this formula from Basma, I think, just hit the nail on the head. It's thin, but it is still a cream formula. It immediately melts into the skin. It is dewy, it is fresh, and yet it doesn't exaggerate texture, which some more dewy cream blushes can. This almost gives me a smooth effect, and there's a bit of translucence to this blush, which I find with red blushes makes for the most natural appearance. This is definitely pigmented, but not as intensely pigmented as you would expect. However, it is buildable, which I personally really like about this one. This is a very versatile formula, not only in color, but also in application. It's very easy to apply. I think with a light hand, not only will the Basma work on very light skin tones, but when built up will also work on deeper skin tones as well. Because it's an easy to work with formula, I think it's also very beginner friendly. But overall, I consider this to be one of the most crowd-pleasing products that we're talking about today. Next up, let's talk about another blush that I think would be particularly good for someone who's a little bit afraid of trying red blush. You don't need to be, and by the end of this video, my goal is to really get you guys excited about red blush. As you know, I've been pretty much wearing strictly red blush for 2 months now. Like, I see red blush in my sleep at this point. But this is from Haus Labs. It is the Haus Labs Color Fuse Talc-Free Blush. They retail for $32 and you get 0.18 ounces in here. By the way, I wanted to give you guys some skin tone swatches, but I also gave you like these little paper swatches just in case that would also be helpful for you all. And this is the shade Watermelon Bliss, and it's called a Universal Red by the Haus Labs team. I think that it is very close to a watermelon pink. Though I think this is on the spectrum of reds. This definitely has more pink than some of the other more true reds that we're going to talk about. This formula from Haus Labs is very thin and uber smooth. It really has a silkiness to it, but the finish is more on the matte side. So there's no like visible shimmer to this, which I personally really like, and the pigmentation is high. There is a lot of pigmentation in this blush, and you'll occasionally see me apply some of these red blushes in this way. I like to take my brush into the product, tap off the excess on the back of my hand, and really get the brush prepped and coated. I learned this technique from Katie Jane Hughes, and it's really been a game changer for me, especially when applying very pigmented products. So highly recommend checking that out. But when I do that, I'm able to apply this really sheerly to the skin, and I get this really pretty watermelon flush. I did some application demos with my friend Katie, who actually is more light than I am, so that you people that have very light skin have another frame of reference. Because I know a lot of people that are very fair are scared to wear red blush. This blush in particular, she has a very light skin tone with with a neutral to warm undertone, and this was one of my favorite blushes on her. I thought it looked absolutely beautiful on her. And there are some other colors that I tried out on Katie that I also think looked perfect. But this one in particular, I thought would be really pretty. Again, especially for someone that doesn't want a true red or is afraid of a true red, this will give you that kind of blushed tomato girl summer red blush look without necessarily being straight red. This is another one of those blushes that I think no matter your skin tone or your skin type, this is going to be another crowd pleaser. I would say though, if you're afraid of pigment, this might not be your best bet. But again, try out that brush tip that I gave you guys. Prepping the brush with the product is a real game changer. And Katie, if you're watching, I will be giving this to you now that I'm done with it. After I applied this on her, I was like, there's no way I'm keeping this. This was made for you. But shall we talk about a blush that pretty much started it all as far as my obsession with red blush? This is the Dior Rosy Glow Blush. It retails for $40 for 0.15 ounces. And I'm gonna tell you guys right now, this is a standout in this video. It is one of the best red blushes on the market. And I know that some people like the Dior Rosy Glow formula, other people don't, but I will be making my case here today for this formula. Like I mentioned before, this is the shade Cherry. Recently, I did also get a chance to swatch Poppy, the new Dior shade next to Cherry. And I gotta tell you guys, there isn't much of a difference. There really is not. You do not need both. The only real difference I saw is that Poppy has a little bit more orange than Cherry. So if you do want something, again, a touch more orange, go with the shade Poppy. But this shade from Dior is already like a Poppy shade to me, just with the orange toned down a notch in comparison. The formula of this blush is incredibly thin, and it has a very hard press to it. So, there are some blushes that aren't pressed as densely and you end up picking up more pigment pretty readily, but this has been pressed pretty stiffly. But what that ends up doing is you're able to really control the product. You can kind of build it up a little bit slower and steadier. The finish is really pretty. It's a nice satin finish. It doesn't mattify the skin, but it also doesn't add glow. So I personally think it's really pretty. I also find that this is the first red blush that I reach for if I want to set any of the other cream blushes that I have on my skin. Oftentimes I'll go in with like a random, like nude blush, but right on the tops of my cheekbones, I'll add a little bit of Dior Cherry. This has been kind of my extra something, my finesse blush product. And it is one of those blushes that kind of takes my look from a very like pretty place to that kind of sexier, summery red flush. Last year, I'm telling you guys, last year, 9 times out of 10, I was probably wearing this blush in some form or fashion on my face. I will say it is prone to hard pan. I don't know if you guys can see that. That is one thing I don't like about it. Also, one of these has popped out before. I have a few shades, and that's kind of annoying. But application is beautiful. I think if you are someone that likes a lot of pigment very immediately, you're not going to be a fan of these from Dior. But for me personally, I like that they're buildable. I think this is very easy to use because it is a buildable product. And being someone that has a warm skin tone, this red blush I think is perfect for me. It's a poppy red, so it has a little bit of red, a little bit of orange, and it doesn't read pink on my skin. Again, there are some red blushes, and we'll talk about, what Sephora has categorized as red blush. I think they're not far off, but some can lean into the pink territory. This one will give you a true red flush. I think it is absolutely beautiful. I would say that if you are someone that likes a powder blush with a buildable pigmentation and you have a warm skin tone, I think that this would be a beautiful option. Maybe not best for very deep skin tones. I think there's another powder that I would recommend that I think builds even more than the Dior, but just know that this is definitely like tied for first place as far as my favorite red blush. You guys can see on Katie, the watermelon shade from Haus Labs looks really good on her. But I think that she can also pull off the Dior. In fact, I think that these two powder blushes were some of my favorites on her. Next, let's talk about, I want to call this an outlier. This is from Givenchy. It is their Prism Libre Loose Powder Blush. It retails for $45, so this is the most expensive blush we're talking about in today's video, and you get 0.15 ounces of product. So what's really cool about this blush is that, like a lot of the Prism Libre line from Givenchy, there are a bunch of different shades that combine together to create one shade. There are warm kind of corals in here. There's some brick reds. Once it's all mixed together, it's closest to a brick red. And what I found interesting about when I looked up specifically red blushes at Sephora, that this was one of the only brick red shades that came up. And I know there's other brick red shades at Sephora, so I did find that interesting. Once I applied this to my skin, the kind of brown brickiness of this really comes through, not necessarily when it's swatched out, but I've noticed in particular if I really want that kind of sun-kissed brick red shade, and by the way, that is a shade that I've been using on my cheeks for years, and it's like a classic favorite for me. I definitely noticed that come through more once this is actually applied to my skin. The formula is insanely finely milled. If you are familiar with any of Givenchy's powder products, you know the difference. It is luxe. You get pretty immediate pigment with this one, and the finish is more satin. So it's not like necessarily super light reflecting, but it does have this really pretty way of melting into the skin. You know, Givenchy, they just do powder really well. They've been doing it for a long time. And this blush is no different. It looks very pretty on the skin. And as much as I hate to say that, you know, it's a love-hate thing because it's expensive, but at the end of the day, my job here is to let you guys know if the formula performs, and this one certainly has for me. Brick red shades, I think, are in particular really pretty for someone that does not typically like blush. And let me explain. If you're someone that consistently forgets to put on blush, or you like bronzer a lot, applying a little bit of this right on top of your bronzer, even just a touch, really adds a pretty sun-kissed effect. Brick reds are definitely one of my favorite shades of blush. I think this probably will work the best on more neutral to warm skin tones. The only reason I'm mentioning skin undertone with these reds is so it's a little bit more helpful for you guys if you guys just don't know where to start. But I think a good caveat is that I wear like cool tone blushes all of the time, even though I have a warm skin tone, and I think they look pretty. So the rules are definitely meant to be broken, but you know, I do want to be helpful for those of you that just don't know where to start. And I have a feeling that those of you with more oily skin will also be a fan of this one. Now, this next blush was a late addition to, you know, all of the blushes that I've been trying. I have to say that I am very, very excited that I included it. This is the Giorgio Armani Cheek Tint. It is the shade Flaming Red, and it is also, I would classify it as one of the closest shades in this video to a true red. It does lean a touch to the bricky side in my opinion, but in my humble opinion, if you are looking for a true red blush, look no further. It retails for $39, but you do get 0.4 ounces of product, which is a lot. And I will say it does have probably my favorite packaging out of all of the products in today's video. It feels both luxurious and easy to use. They've definitely captured the kind of everyday luxe feel. And yes, it is a doe foot applicator. Some people like that, some people don't. No matter what you think, it does make it easy. This product is very pigmented, but it is also very long lasting. So it is within the Luminous Silk line. I'm telling you guys, you can tell when it's on the skin. It actually has quite a similar texture to the Luminous Silk Concealer, if you guys are familiar with that product. It is one of my favorite concealers, and you guys know, or maybe you don't, I am very, very picky with concealers. This has a beautiful texture to it. It is both liquidy, but it also has a little bit of a heft. So it's lightweight, but not so thin and lightweight that it dries down really quickly and you can't work with it. It just ends up having this very luxurious satin blurring finish on the skin. It definitely has the silky quality that a lot of people look to Giorgio Armani for. I don't think that this was Giorgio Armani coming out with a liquid formula and then just slapping luminous silk on it. I definitely see how this formula fits in with their other luminous silk items, and I'm very, very happy to have it. I would say the formula is closest to the ones from Rare Beauty. This might be surprising to you all, but Rare Beauty doesn't actually have a true red shade, and we'll talk about the red from Rare Beauty in a second. Personally, for me, I think if you are looking in this video for a true red blush, you like pigmentation, you want a really pretty blurred finish, you prefer working with liquids, this is the one that I would guide you towards because this is more of a true red. Of course, like the typical people I would recommend it to would be those of you with a more warm skin tone. But for me personally, I think with a deft hand, this could be very flattering on a lot of people. And because you can really saturate this pigment and get a very intense look, a wide variety of skin tones can definitely use this. But shall we talk about the red blush that is on my cheeks today? It is the Merit Flush Balm in the shade Rouge. It retails for $30. You get 0.31 ounces of product. And I'm gonna call this a very classic coral red. It's not necessarily coral pink. I think it has a really nice balance to it. There are some coral reds that just have a ton of pink to it. For me, I think that Merit has come out with truly not only a very flattering shade, I think, for a lot of people, but a formula that they knocked it out of the park with the shade and the formula combination. One of my favorite blushes of the video. Like the Dior and the Merit are probably like my top picks. However, this formula from Merit is more balmy, so it definitely has a dewiness to it. It's a thin balm though, so it's not like sticky heavy, and it is sheer, but what is really beautiful about the Merit is that even though this is sheer, this shade really builds up. You can really get some intensity. Again, I'm wearing it on my cheeks today, and it gives this really beautiful dewy finish to the skin. It looks really healthy. Like if you do have more normal to dry skin, this formula and this shade might be like a slam dunk for you. It is so easy, and I actually did apply this one onto Katie for you guys. It's beautiful on her. Do you see like the glow it gives her skin? I really, really liked this one on her. What is beautiful is that there's a sheerness to this base. I think some brands add too much white base pigment and it ends up looking very awkward on the skin, especially if you have like a deeper skin tone. It can look very, very weird. Because there's a sheerness to this base pigment, it makes it very versatile. Your skin kind of shines through the product. It ends up giving a very kind of like stained effect, like the product is really coming from the skin, or like the shade is coming from the skin. It's an absolute slam dunk in my opinion. And you know, for such a dewy formula, it actually lasts a lot longer than I would have ever expected. I think this one is really, really good for beginners trying to get into red blush. Add this onto the top of the cheeks and you're going to get like such a pretty sunburnt red effect. It is beautiful. Next, let's talk about Glossier and their shade Spark. So this is the Glossier Cloud Paint. It retails for $22 for 0.33 ounces of product, which is definitely not a bad bang for your buck, I would say. They call this a bright poppy. I'm gonna call this a poppy shade that's just a touch more muted. Like, I don't think this is actually a super bright poppy. I find that there's like a touch of a depth to this one. And remember when I was talking to you guys about like the base pigment thing? Wish that Glossier went even more translucent with this base pigment. And that wouldn't necessarily be an issue if I didn't feel like this one dries down a little faster than other cloud paints that I've tried. You can still get a really pretty look though. It's just kind of a caveat that I wanted to mention and something I experienced while testing this one. You got a lot of pigmentation in this one, a really pretty satin finish. And this one does read as more orange, especially on Katie. So if you are looking for a poppy shade that's like a touch more muted, it still has a little bit of orange to it, this could be a good option. I do like that this one is especially easy to mix into other blushes, especially if I was kind of on the fence between an orange blush and a red blush. This is one that I would reach for. One though that I found to be a little bit odd is the YSL Nu Lip2Cheek. It retails for $29 for 0.5 ounces. Listen, for YSL, that is good. And $29, I think they probably could have charged more if they felt like it. I'm glad they didn't though. I'm glad they didn't. I'm just saying. More so an observation I'm making. This is the shade Nu Flush. They call it a true red. I'm gonna say that it is a true red. It's a little bit darker, so it might not be like the same bright true red that some of us might think of when we think of red. But in general, I would call this a true red. There's just a little bit of depth to this one. And I will say this shade in combination with the texture it stumped me for a bit. It's very balmy on the skin. I think this is probably best for folks that don't wear a lot of foundation, don't have a lot of coverage product on the skin, because it will move coverage. In general, it gave like a really pretty dewiness on the cheek, and it doesn't, it makes the skin look healthier. But at the end of the day, it does feel a little bit too finicky for me to want to reach for it all the time. And somehow the shade, again, the shade is very odd to me. It's like red, but it's a little muted. And that's like not what I'm looking for when I'm looking for a red. I struggle to mention who to recommend it to, just because I would, in most cases, just recommend the Merit one instead. Let's talk about a makeup artist favorite. This is from NARS. It is their blush in Exhibit A. This is the new formula, the talc-free version. And I feel like it is a pretty close shade to like the red that I'm wearing today. They call this a warm red orange, and this is definitely a warm red orange. Probably has the most orange out of all of the shades that we're talking about. By the way, side note, I just gotta mention this gloss. I meant to talk about it when we were talking about Armani. This is the Prism gloss in the shade 04. It's a beautiful cherry shade. And the formula is really lovely. Had to take like a reapplication break there. But let's get back to NARS. I have seen some reviews and comments that maybe they changed this shade a little bit. I could have sworn when I've swatched it in the past that there was more like red to this, but I can't be sure. If you have a warm undertone, you like playing with orange shades and warm shades, I still think that it's very pretty, especially if you have more oily skin. I see this being a really good pick because the texture is very thin. The pigmentation is there and it's very buildable. I can see people really enjoying this one. Don't see myself reaching for it a ton just because I prefer the cherry shade from Dior more. But if I really want to play with orange, maybe if I'm doing like kind of a tangerine lip, I think that this would be very pretty. I'm not sure if you guys can see in the swatches, but this one looks pretty orange. Let's talk about a blush that I do think that this one might actually work for more people. And I know that I often talk about my beloved e.l.f. liquid camo blushes, which I do think are pretty much a dupe for the Rare Beauty. But as far as I know, e.l.f. does not have a dupe for this shade in specific from Rare Beauty. This is the shade Grateful. It retails for $24, but you can also get the mini version as well. And by the way, I'll leave a link to the mini version as well, but if you guys do find this video helpful, if you want to help support my channel, and in general, if you're finding value in my content, bringing you guys like value-driven content is something I've been doing since the beginning of my channel, and I don't want to stop anytime soon. So if you do want to help support my channel using any of the links down below helps. I make a small commission from them. Giving this video a thumbs up helps, leaving a comment, and definitely subscribe if you're not subscribed already if you enjoyed the video. Let's get back to the Rare Beauty blush. $24 for 25 ounces is not bad, and believe me, this is a pigmented product, so a little bit will go a long way. Rare Beauty calls this a true red. I'm gonna call it like a tomato red. This is the most like tomatoey tomato red of all of the blushes that we're talking about in today's video. And by the way, this is the dewy finish from Rare Beauty. I find the dewy finish to not be overly dewy. Maybe that's just because I have dry skin. Feel free to like drop me a comment down below if with your experience, but I don't think they're overly dewy, and they're definitely not sticky. They're so lightweight on the skin. And when you blend them, the orange undertone really comes out in this shade. You know, I didn't know how this one was gonna look on Katie, but at the end of it, I thought it looked really pretty. From very fair to very deep skin tones. If you want that true tomato red, look no further. I think that this one is for you. And if you want a long-lasting blush, this is also very long-lasting. But I do have to mention a product that I added specifically into this video. Even though Sephora does not carry them anymore, I had to try out the RMS Lip2Cheek in the shade Beloved. The reason being is that this red blush went completely viral over on TikTok. So RMS's makeup artist, and I'm pretty sure the founder, talked about how she worked with Victoria's Secret models. And oftentimes she would add a little bit of this red flush to their cheeks.
Another little trick that I did when I worked for Victoria's Secret, I would pop on just a little hint of red, the tiniest bit. This is my Beloved. And the red will just kind of take it away from that pink that it tends to go. If I use pink, it's going to be too pink. It's going to be too soft. It's that little pinch of redness that goes to the cheeks. And this is, look at how natural this looks. And it has a little bit, this red works very well with the skin, and it just gives that little flush without being pink where it's looking too like, that's looking a little too baby pinky. So you can see that beautiful little elegance. So red comes in really, really handy for these little tricks. Beautiful, oh my God, sexy as hell.
So I wanted to include this one in today's video because I knew that I was gonna get like, that was gonna be like one of the first comments that I got, like, but what about the one from RMS? So here it is, we're talking about it. They retail for $36 and you get 0.17 ounces of product. This is a very pretty poppy red shade. It has a really beautiful translucent base to it, which we talked about before, just makes for a really good experience as far as red blush goes. The formula is thin, it's a very dewy finish, but you can really build up the pigment with this one. And for me, I gotta say that like the finish, the way it looks on the skin, everything, I really, really like it. This is one of my favorites. It just gives me that perfect sunburnt flush and I cannot get enough. It also sticks where you put it. So like there are some more dewy products that kind of pick up on themselves. I don't find this product to do that. It is like balmy. You can't like not pay attention when you're applying it necessarily, but it's definitely not as finicky as I maybe anticipated. It's really a joy to apply. In the twist of the century, and this isn't even really a twist, I like talked about this years and years ago on my channel. The main ingredient in here is coconut oil. And if you are acne prone, this is not anything that I would recommend you put on your skin. For me personally, I'm someone that breaks out more hormonally. This is not going to be an everyday blush for me. It's going to be like a special occasion blush. If you don't typically break out, if you have more mature skin, I don't think that you need to necessarily worry about the coconut oil. For me personally, I think it's a bummer that they have included the coconut oil. But let me know down below. Like, I know that coconut oil is a very, you know, people either love it or hate it. I don't want to demonize it. I just don't want to put it on my face every day. But I gotta tell you guys, this one looked good on Katie. Katie is working it. I love the finish. I love the color. Merit Rouge and Beloved from RMS are so similar though. I think you could really go with either, just depending on your preference. Maybe just a little more pink from Merit Rouge. I don't know. They're so similar though. Now let's talk about one that I do not like. And I was not anticipating this. However, I think that this potentially could be a very, very good option if you have a cooler skin tone and you are worried about some of these blushes with more orange to them. This is from Charlotte Tilbury, and it's their Matte Beauty Blush Wand in the shade Dream Pop. They retail for $42 and you get 0.4 ounces of product. They call this a cherry pink. I'm not getting cherry pink from this. It's a bit muted. I do think that this kind of shade would particularly work well on someone with a cooler skin tone that wanted to try red blush. And the formula is beautiful. Like, I love this formula from Charlotte Tilbury. It has a creamy liquid texture. It's very smooth. It's easy to blend. There's high pigmentation, but it also is pretty effortless to blend. And there's this kind of spreadability to them that just makes them easy to work with. Like you wanna reach for them. They call them the matte beauty blush wands, but they're not mattifying. There's just no sparkle to them. Whereas like their high blushes had like a lot of sparkle to them. It's more of a satin finish in my opinion. I don't mind this one on me, but I will say when I put it on Katie, we both agreed that it kind of made her look a little sallow. But again, both her and I have like more of a warm skin tone. Holding out hope on this one that if you have more of a cool skin tone, that this would look really pretty on you. And I definitely want to hear from you. If you have tried this out, what your skin tone is, definitely leave me a comment below. And as a whole, thank you guys so much for being here. Let me know down below what you think about red blush. Was this video helpful? I'd really like to potentially try out a lot of drugstore red blushes. I don't know if that would feel redundant to you guys, but overall, thank you guys for being here. Thank you for being so patient too with me finally coming out with this. I really wanted to like truly test these out and give you like the best possible video. So I hope I did that for you guys. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you in my next one.